What's up everybody, this is Silent Wolf and this is my speedrun tutorial for Jungle Hijinx, the very first stage in the game. So what I'm going to do to start this off is just play the stage through, get a preview of what this would look like if done optimally, and then after that I will do a more detailed breakdown of the stage piece by piece. So don't blink, the stage actually is pretty short. And despite being the first stage in the game, it's definitely not the easiest stage in the game, especially when you're first learning how to play this game. Alright, so going back to the beginning, I'm just going to pause right off the bat here and talk about a couple things. So, number one, you'll notice that we start with DK, but we pretty much immediately kill him off for a handful of reasons. One, DK is slower than Diddy. Two, we would need to swap to Diddy to utilize his speed anyways, so just taking damage with DK is faster, although we do lose time from picking up DK later. Another reason that we kill off DK is having two Kongs generates lag in some of the following stages, so we don't want that. And also, for each stage that you enter with only one Kong instead of two, you save 10 frames. So throughout all of World 1, we'll be entering 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, and 1, 5 with one Kong instead of two, saving a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 40 frames because of that. So, just to start it off, you'll see at the input display that pretty much right before I even land, I do a roll. In this game, you do have a little bit of a frame window to buffer rolls before you land, and doing this is usually a good idea to make sure that you are getting your rolls out as soon as you're hitting the ground for optimal movement. So this beginning part is pretty simple. You just want to roll, do a minimum jump, and then start another roll immediately. When you're just trying to chain rolls like this, it's important to keep your jumps as short as possible, just so you can minimize the time that you're in the air and maximize the time that you spend rolling on the ground. I'm going to do this next part in slow motion. So, as you can see, we're just holding forward and Y here, rolling through the beaver. And here's where the first little piece of tech comes in. So you're going to notice I'm not holding Y here. And the reason that I'm doing this is because you don't want to grab the DK barrel right away. You want to spend as much time in your roll as possible before grabbing the DK barrel. So I'm going to roll into the DK barrel just a little bit. You don't want to get too greedy or you'll miss it and have to reset. And once I'm just about through the DK barrel, you'll see that I repress Y right here on the input display to pick it up. Once again, just to maximize my roll time and minimize the time I'm spending doing other things. Continuing in slow motion here. Okay, this next piece of tech, this is where we're killing off Donkey Kong. And this is a bit riskier of a method of doing this. There is an alternative that I'll talk about in a bit, but for now this is the optimal strat that everyone goes for. Now what we're attempting to do here is break open this barrel and then immediately kill off Donkey Kong afterwards. And the way that we do this is pretty much get as close to this beaver as we can without taking damage. And then right there when we're all up in his grill, we release Y and start throwing the barrel. Now if you time this right, you'll hit the creme with the barrel and take damage with DK on the beaver. There is a slightly faster way to do this strat, but I'll talk about that in a bit because it's not quite as reliable as this method. Now what this looks like when I speed it up, DK dies and now we're free with Diddy. And you'll notice we immediately start rolling. If you want to get an optimal roll out of your roll, you're going to want to start it right around here. I usually use this hump in the ground as a visual cue and just go from there. It's usually like this distance from that hump. So you can see I'm kind of blinking around so you can't see Diddy all the time, but you can see on the input display this is where you start the roll. Now this next part that's coming up is what makes this stage challenging, especially for one of the first stages in the game. So what we're going to bust out here on this line of enemies is something called an extended roll. And what that is so normally when you roll through an enemy, you hold Y, you gain additional speed while rolling through them, and then your roll ends. What you can do is tap Y, release Y as you roll through an enemy, and then later repress Y. And what this allows you to do is extend your roll longer than you normally would have been able to roll otherwise. It's a bit complicated the way that your speed works while doing extended rolls. If you release Y, roll through an enemy, you don't actually get that additional rolling speed afterwards until you repress Y. So yeah, that's just something important to note about extended rolls. So for this one in particular, I'm going to detail exactly how to do this. So we're going to want to jump right in front of this creme. And I would recommend watching the input display to observe the Y inputs for this as well. It'd be really helpful. So I'm going to land on this thing right in front of the creme, tap Y, just tapping Y because I don't want to be holding Y as I go through the creme. You can see I've released Y now, and then the moment I roll through the creme, I'm going to repress Y, and you'll see this on the input display. Now what this does is extend my roll so I can make it over this gap and roll through the next creme. So at this point, I'm just holding Y. As long as you executed that first part correctly, you're just holding Y at this point. Now, once I approach this clump, this is where things become a little bit trickier. So once again, to get an extended roll, I am going to release Y right before this clump. Right before him, you can see I release on this frame. After I roll through him, I'm going to repress Y somewhere around here. And then right before I roll through this clump, I release Y again. And then it's not till somewhere around this halfway point where I repress. You want to be pretty close to the ledge. Yeah, right here is where I repress. And this gives you a pretty massive roll. I'm just going to speed this up real quick. Let's just watch that again so you get a better grasp on how that looks. Yeah, and you pretty much just go flying through the stage there. Now, something useful to note is that you don't need to be holding Y the whole time you're rolling. You'll just have that full speed the whole time. So one thing that's useful when you're doing this extendo is you'll notice that at this point, I'm not even holding Y anymore. I just kind of repressed it for that moment, and then I let go. And the reason that I let go is because there's actually a barrel right here. And if you're holding Y as you roll through that barrel, you're going to pick it up and lose all your speed. So you want to just kind of not be holding Y this whole time. And then at any point after you pass that barrel, you're free to start holding Y again. And you want to pretty much milk this roll for everything it has. Let's get a good look at that. Yeah, so you get a feel for when Diddy's roll is about to end based on his cartwheel animation. So you can see I'm about to end the cartwheel right here. Right around there, and that's when I start to jump. Since I rolled through so many enemies during that roll, like I want to milk it as long as I can just to keep that speed. Because for each enemy that you roll through, it adds on to your total speed. As far as 4 enemies. If you roll through 5 enemies, it doesn't give you any additional speed at that point. So it's really crucial to milk that roll for everything it's worth. The next parts are pretty straightforward. You just want to jump. And you can roll out of that roll. After you roll through an enemy, you can keep rolling and start another roll. If you were to just do a bear roll, like without rolling through an enemy, you would have to jump to cancel it or else your roll would die. But the reason that we bother to jump out of this one is because you can get on this platform and get another pretty meaty roll out of it. Because you'll see whenever you roll off a ledge and then make contact with the ground, it just keeps your roll going for a pretty significant amount of time. And then you come up to these beavers. Nothing special about these beavers, really. I try and make sure that I always start my roll in front of these beavers from the same position. And the reason that I do that is just because I think it affects your trajectory off of this slope. And depending on that, your visual cue might change for this jump. This is another scenario where you're really going to want to milk those rolls as long as you can. But you don't want to get too greedy and bonk this edge right here. So you do want to make sure you jump early enough to bonk it, or to not bonk it, but not so early that you're not milking your roll for its full worth. So usually somewhere around when I reach the ground is where I jump and just barely make it past this ledge. As soon as I land, immediately do a minimum jump. And then I'm just holding B and I'm going to do a max bounce off of this creme. Pretty simple stuff. Visual cue to maximize this roll. Pretty much right when you grab this second banana. Maybe even like a little bit before that. That's where you're going to want to start this roll. And it's really good to try and milk your rolls for everything that they're worth. Like it's useful to just kind of keep testing like farther and farther back from a ledge how far you can start your roll to really maximize it. If you do your rolls really close to a ledge, you just don't get as much roll time. If you do your roll too far from a ledge, your roll is going to die before you roll off the ledge or the platform. So it's really important that you just maximize all your rolls. This last roll over the gap is a bit tricky. After this roll here, you're going to want to run for just a little bit before starting this roll. Otherwise, you're going to get a slow roll and you're going to fall right in the pit. So you can see that I'm running here for just a bit and then starting this roll. And I'm just going to replay that real quick. So after this roll, run a little bit and then do that roll. You run for like the slightest amount of time. Again, we're trying to optimize these rolls. So I usually use these flower things, I don't know what the fuck they are, just marks on the ground, as visual cues for when I start this last roll. You can see I've already kind of jumped in a position where I'm going to start my roll. Yeah, and that's what the stage looks like, mostly optimally. So let's just go ahead and take a full look at that one more time. These are pretty much the standard strats that all the top runners go for in this stage. There are a couple variations to strats in this stage that I want to touch on as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. So let's look at a strat that's a little bit faster, although it's not totally reliable. So this is one I was talking about earlier. So rather than breaking open the barrel on the creme and taking damage on the beaver, if you roll through the DK barrel and pick it up at the right timing to where the beaver spawns at a certain spot relative to the creme, if you time this frame perfectly, you can actually hit the beaver with the DK barrel and take damage with DK on the same frame. You can see the two explosions. One of them is you hitting the beaver, and the other one is the beaver hitting DK. Now, the reason that this is faster than hitting the creme with the DK barrel is because the creme isn't dead, the creme is still there, and you can actually get a nice roll through the creme. Look at DK and the beaver. Fuck them both. Alright, Jesus, die already. Fucking A. Anyways, yeah, you can see that you get a nice sexy roll through this creme, but you do want to do a baby extendo through him. Otherwise your roll is going to die like right over here, and you won't get that additional roll speed off the platform here. So just looking at the input display, you can see I already tapped Y. Roll through him, and then I'll pretty much immediately repress Y just to get that full roll speed, and then you just follow through with the rest of the strat. So let's see that in quick motion. Oh yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much like the big dick strat. It just kind of happens sometimes. I don't ever like try and like intentionally go for it. I also want to include a slightly suboptimal variation of the stage, just because when I was learning this game, this is the route that I did, and honestly I found it much easier than what people are doing today. So let's take a look at this. I'm not gonna bother to go through this slow motion, but I might watch it a couple times just to touch on a couple things. So the main differences here are throwing the DK barrel, rolling and jumping, so you're not risking dying on the beaver, and then jumping up here and starting the extendo. And the reason that's easier is you're just not jumping right in the creme's face right there, but just rather rolling from the top of the tree. And the inputs for the extendo following that are the same that I outlined earlier, so no changes there. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys for Jungle Hijinx. Hopefully that helps. Yeah.